They say small talk is the doorway to connection, a harmless exchange, a social lubricant, just words about weather, traffic, weekend plans. But for some people, that doorway feels locked, or worse, hollow. You smile, you nod, you answer politely, yet inside, something quietly withdraws. Not because you are rude, not because you dislike people, but because these conversations feel like standing ankle-deep in water that never reaches the heart. Why do certain people feel drained by casual chatter while others thrive in it? Why does speaking about nothing sometimes feel heavier than silence itself? And why is this discomfort so often misunderstood as arrogance, coldness, or social awkwardness, when it is none of those things? This is not a story about disliking conversation. It is about craving meaning, about a mind that listens for depth in a world trained to skim surfaces. A quiet psychological pattern hides here, unspoken, misjudged, deeply human. Tonight, that silence is explored. Let's begin. There is a specific feeling that arrives during small talk. It doesn't crash. It doesn't announce itself. It settles. You are standing there exchanging words that sound correct. Your face responds on cue. Your voice participates. Nothing is wrong on the outside, but inside something begins to thin out, like water evaporating from a shallow dish. The conversation moves, yet nothing moves you. Topics circle weather, schedules, harmless updates. They pass through the air cleanly, never landing anywhere deep enough to stay. And slowly, a quiet fatigue appears. Not the exhaustion of effort, but the tiredness of emptiness. This is often misunderstood, because society teaches that discomfort in conversation means anxiety, or poor social skills, or a lack of confidence. But this discomfort is different. It isn't fear, it's dissonance. A mismatch between what is being exchanged and what your inner world is tuned to receive. For some people, small talk feels light. It warms the air, creates rhythm. It signals safety. For others, it feels like chewing food with no taste. Not painful, just hollow. And that hollowness is draining. You may notice your attention slipping, your energy lowering, your body wanting to retreat, not from people but from the absence of substance. This is why silence can feel kinder than chatter. Why a quiet room feels fuller than a crowded conversation. Why you might prefer a single honest sentence over 10 friendly ones. Yet this preference often brings guilt. Why can't this just be easy? Why does everyone else seem fine? Why does something so normal feel so unnatural? Because what is happening here is not rejection. It is sensitivity, a nervous system that listens for depth, an emotional radar calibrated to meaning, not noise. Small talk offers signals without substance, movement without direction, sound without resonance, and your system notices, so it withdraws not dramatically but gently, like a tide pulling back from a shore that cannot hold it. This is not a flaw, but at this stage it rarely feels that way. It feels isolating, confusing, quietly alienating, because the world rarely pauses to ask why some people need more than the surface. Long before adulthood conversations, long before networking events or polite office exchanges, there were earlier rooms where you first learned how connection works. In some childhoods, conversation was playful, light, frequent. Words floated easily without consequence. But in others, words carried weight. Maybe emotions in your home were intense. Unspoken tensions sat at the dinner table like invisible guests. Or perhaps feelings were rarely discussed at all. Silence was safer than expression. When you grow up in an emotionally charged or emotionally restrained environment, you learn something subtle. Words matter. They are not filler. They are signals. You begin to watch tone, facial shifts, pauses between sentences. You listen not just to what is said, but to what trembles underneath it. And in that kind of environment, shallow words feel unnecessary. Because early on, your nervous system was trained to scan for meaning, for truth, for emotional undercurrents. Small talk does not provide undercurrents. It schemes. If, as a child, you were praised for being mature, observant, or deep, you may have internalized an identity around insight. You may have felt older than your years, quieter than your peers. Surface chatter might have felt confusing even then. Other children bonded through constant playful exchange. But you may have bonded through shared secrets, late-night honesty, moments of realness, or perhaps depth became your private refuge. If emotional needs were unmet, you may have developed a rich inner world, a place where thoughts expanded and feelings were processed in silence. In that space, conversations had layers. Small talk has no layers. So when adulthood arrives and the social world expects rapid, effortless exchange about safe topics, something inside hesitates. Because your blueprint for connection was never built around speed. It was built around sincerity. Your early environment may have taught you that connection requires vulnerability, or at least emotional presence. So when words float by without anchoring anywhere real, your system does not recognize it as bonding. It recognizes it as performance, and performance is tiring. This is why you may not dislike people. You may dislike the choreography, the dance of saying something without meaning it deeply, of asking questions that do not invite real answers. Early emotional conditioning shapes conversational hunger. Some are nourished by frequency, others by depth. Neither is superior, but they are different. And difference, when misunderstood, often becomes self-doubt. Some minds move horizontally, quick exchanges, fast signals, light connections that stack over time. Other minds move vertically. They don't skim, they descend. A depth-oriented mind is not searching for more information. It is searching for relevance. When you speak, this mind is already asking quiet questions beneath the words. What does this mean? Why is this being shared? What truth sits behind it? Small talk rarely answers those questions. It offers facts without context, pleasantries without emotional data, noise without narrative. Psychologically, depth-oriented people process the world differently. They are pattern-sensitive, emotionally attuned, often introspective by default. Their attention doesn't scatter easily, but when it does, it withdraws completely. This is why small talk feels overstimulating and underwhelming at the same time. Too many words, too little signal. The brain listens for coherence, for meaning that connects to something larger: identity, emotion, values, experience. When conversation lacks those anchors, the mind doesn't engage. It hovers, and hovering is exhausting. This kind of mind also tends to experience emotions somatically. A subtle tightness, a quiet heaviness, a pull towards silence when authenticity feels absent. Not because silence is preferred, but because silence is honest. Depth-oriented people are often mischaracterized as introverted, but that is only partially true. They can speak at length when the topic touches something real. They can become animated when meaning appears. What they resist is not interaction. It is fragmentation, rapid topic shifts, predictable scripts, social rituals designed to fill space rather than explore it. Their nervous system does not reward this with dopamine. It rewards insight, resonance, emotional recognition. So during small talk, there is no payoff, only depletion. This creates a quiet paradox. You may crave connection deeply, yet feel disconnected in most social settings. You may long to be understood, yet feel invisible in conversations that never slow down long enough to see you. This is not social incompetence. It is a mismatch between conversational culture and cognitive orientation. A mind built for depth will always struggle in shallow waters, not because it cannot swim, but because it was never meant to stay on the surface. There is a quiet contradiction that lives inside you. You want connection, but not like this. You want to be seen, but not through scripts. So you stand in conversations that feel wrong, yet necessary. You participate even as something inside tightens. This creates conflict, because humans are wired for belonging. And small talk is often presented as the entrance fee. If you don't pay it, you risk being misunderstood, labeled distant, cold, uninterested. So you learn to perform. You smile at the right moments. You ask questions you already know the answers to. You nod through stories that never touch anything real. This performance is subtle, but it is heavy. Each exchange asks you to split in two, the part that speaks, and the part that watches itself speaking. And the watching part grows tired. You may leave social situations feeling oddly empty, not rejected, not embarrassed, just drained, because masking requires constant regulation, monitoring tone, editing honesty, suppressing the urge to ask deeper questions that might feel too much. So you hold back, and over time, holding back becomes habit. You may begin to question yourself. Why can't you just relax? Why does this feel like work? Others seem to float through conversations effortlessly. They bond through frequency, laughter, shared trivialities. You bond through meaning, but meaning is rare in fast-moving social spaces. This inner conflict can create isolation even in crowded rooms, because you are present but not engaged, seen but not known. And the loneliest part? You may start blaming yourself for it. You may wonder if something is broken, if you are too intense, too quiet, too serious. But what is actually happening is resistance, not to people but to inauthenticity. Your system resists being shallow when it is built for depth. So it withdraws, protectively, quietly, yet withdrawal brings its own pain, because isolation is not what you want either. You are caught between two unsatisfying options: perform and feel false, or withdraw and feel alone. This is the inner tension many depth-oriented people carry without language. A constant negotiation between self-preservation and social survival. And until it is understood, it feels like a personal failure. When people don't understand your silence, they fill it with assumptions. They assume disinterest, superiority, social anxiety, emotional distance, because in a culture that values constant exchange, quiet becomes suspicious. If you don't offer casual updates, you must be hiding something. If you don't participate enthusiastically, you must be judging. If you don't enjoy light chatter, you must lack confidence. These interpretations rarely come from cruelty. They come from unfamiliarity. Most people are trained to equate friendliness with frequency. The more you speak, the more approachable you seem. Depth-oriented people break this equation. You may listen more than you speak. Pause longer than expected. Respond thoughtfully instead of quickly. To some, this feels unsettling. So they label. But labels flatten complexity. What looks like aloofness is often attentiveness. What looks like reserve is often sensitivity. What looks like detachment is often discernment. You may care deeply about people, about emotions, about truth. But you don't express care through constant verbal output. You express it through presence, through memory, through noticing what others overlook. Yet these forms of care are quiet, and quiet is easily missed. This mislabeling can slowly erode self-trust. You may begin to overcompensate, talking more than feels natural, laughing louder than feels honest, offering pieces of yourself prematurely just to seem normal. Or you may do the opposite. Retreat completely. Decide that being misunderstood is safer than being exposed. Both responses come from the same wound, being seen inaccurately. Over time, this gap between perception and reality creates emotional fatigue. You are not only managing conversations, you are managing an image. And image management is draining, because it asks you to edit yourself to fit expectations that were never designed for you. Society often rewards surface compatibility over internal alignment. Those who adapt easily are praised. Those who resist are pathologized. But resistance is not always fear. Sometimes it is integrity. The integrity to not pretend that shallow exchanges satisfy a deeper hunger. Misunderstanding hurts not because others are wrong, but because it keeps you unseen. And being unseen, repeatedly, quietly shapes how you relate to the world. There is a moment, often subtle, when something shifts. It doesn't arrive as confidence. It arrives as relief. A realization forms quietly. Nothing is wrong. Not with your personality. Not with your social ability. Not with your capacity for connection. What felt like failure begins to look like mismatch. You start noticing patterns. How certain conversations drain you, while others light something up inside. How one meaningful exchange can nourish you more than hours of polite chatter. You see that your discomfort was never random. It was consistent, predictable. Your system has preferences, and preferences are not flaws. This realization changes the internal narrative. The question shifts from, "Why can't I do this?" to "Why does this not feed me?" That distinction matters, because self-blame dissolves when understanding appears. You stop forcing yourself to enjoy interactions that leave you empty. You stop pathologizing your need for depth. You stop shrinking your curiosity to fit into spaces that cannot hold it. Instead, you begin to trust your internal signals. The tiredness after small talk was information. The relief in silence was information. The spark during meaningful conversation was information. Your body was communicating long before words caught up. This is not a rejection of the social world. It is a selective engagement with it. You may still participate in small talk when necessary, but it no longer defines you. It no longer measures your worth. You begin to understand that connection is not universal in form. It is personal in texture. Some people connect through frequency, others through intensity, others through shared action, or silence, or mutual understanding. Your way was simply quieter. This realization brings a kind of peace, not because the world suddenly changes, but because your relationship with yourself does. You stop trying to become lighter when you are built to go deeper, and in that acceptance, something softens. Depth is not an absence of connection. It is a different dialect of it. Some people speak through constant words. Others speak through pauses, through what is not rushed, through what is allowed to unfold. For depth-oriented people, connection often begins long before conversation. It begins with observation, with sensing emotional weather, with noticing shifts that others overlook. This is why silence can feel intimate rather than awkward, because in silence, nothing is being performed. Nothing is being filled. Presence becomes enough. Depth-oriented connection is slow. It does not announce itself. It accumulates like sediment at the bottom of a river. A look held a second longer than necessary. A question that is answered honestly instead of politely. A shared moment where neither person feels the need to impress. These moments are rare, but when they appear, they are unmistakable. This is why you may form fewer connections but feel them more deeply. Why your circle may be small but meaningful. Why superficial compatibility never satisfies you for long. You are not searching for interaction. You are searching for resonance. Resonance does not require many words. It requires alignment. Depth as a language also means selectivity. Not everyone is invited into your inner world. Not because you are closed, but because you are careful. You understand, perhaps instinctively, that depth carries vulnerability. And vulnerability needs safety. So you wait. This waiting is often misunderstood as withdrawal. But it is actually discernment. When connection does happen, it feels grounding, restorative, like finally exhaling after holding your breath. You do not leave these interactions tired. You leave them clearer. This is the kind of connection that nourishes rather than drains, that expands rather than fragments. And it exists not everywhere but somewhere. Learning this reframes your relationship with solitude. Solitude becomes a space of preservation, not loneliness. A place where your depth is not diluted. Depth was never the problem. It was always the language. There is a quiet grief in realizing the world is louder than your nature. Conversations move quickly. Connections form lightly. Energy scatters across rooms like sparks. And you stand there steady, listening for something slower. For a long time, you may have believed you were out of place. Too serious. Too quiet. Too much beneath the surface. But perhaps the world is not built for one rhythm. Perhaps it needs many. The river does not apologize for flowing deeper than the rain puddle. The ocean does not compete with the stream. They exist differently, and both belong. Small talk is not wrong. It is simply not your language of nourishment. And once that truth settles in your chest, something loosens. You stop trying to dilute yourself to be digestible. You stop measuring connection by volume. You stop equating silence with failure. Instead, you begin to recognize your kind. The ones who ask questions that linger, who pause before responding, who prefer truth over performance. They are not everywhere, but they are here. And when depth meets depth, something rare happens. Conversation slows, walls lower, meaning surfaces. No choreography, no scripts, just presence. Belonging, for you, was never about being included in every exchange. It was about being understood in at least one. And that is enough. If parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you felt named without being judged, then you were never alone in this. There are many who move through the world listening for depth in a surface-driven culture. Many who leave conversations tired, not because they dislike people, but because they long for something more honest. This space exists for those inner experiences, a place where the hidden corners of the human heart are explored gently, without labels or pressure. If you'd like to stay connected to reflections like this, you're welcome here. And if you feel comfortable sharing your experience in the comments, your words may help someone else realize they are not strange, only different. There is no obligation, only invitation. You deserve spaces where your depth is not too much. You deserve conversations that feel like home.